Looking at the Great Depression. So before we head into the Great Depression, let's just take a second to look back. So we finished up in the 1920s, and there was lots of good things going on, right? Life wasn't too great immediately after the war. The people lost a lot of jobs, particularly women. You have a great deal of racism. But in 1924, things start to pick up, and you have the fashion, the movies, the new technologies that rear in the Roaring 20s. However, everything changes. Just like World War I, we have both the indirect causes of the economic crash that we see in 1929, as well as the direct cause. So the direct cause is the stock market crash of 1929. People have been investing their money in the stock market, they've been making huge profits, and then all of a sudden, or what it seems to be all of a sudden, and we'll talk about that more when I come back to class, the stock market crashes and people lose tons and tons and tons and tons of money. You also have rising unemployment. In the 1920s, we talked about the fact that there was new technology, which led to more demand, which led to more jobs, which led to more money. However, this new demand is created for these new technologies, right? So people buy a refrigerator, everyone has a refrigerator. Then they buy a car, people have cars. Then they buy telephones. So what happens is people have these items, so demand goes down, right? So there's less demand for these new technologies because people already have them. And when there's less demand, right, at a company, that means that people are let go, right? So there's less jobs, which means there's less money, which means there's less spending. The other thing that takes place, just to make things even more exciting, is you have a bank failure. So at this point in Canadian history, banks kept about 10% of the money that you deposited. So if you put in $100, that means that $10 of the $100 that you put in is actually in the bank. So what do they do with the other $90? Well, they invest it in the stock market, right? Or in other bonds, etc. But stock market was very big in the 1920s. So they invested in the stock market, and the stock market crashes in 1929. So therefore, the banks don't have your money, right? People are losing jobs, people don't have money. Even if they had saved their money and they had invested in the stock market, that money's literally vanished. Then people stop purchasing these new products, as we've talked about. There's higher taxes on imports, and there's a huge drought, which we'll get into details. So all of this contributes to create the Depression, all right? One of Canada's biggest economic slowdowns in history. All right, later on, I want you to come back and I want you to check out this video. This is a video about the Dion quintuplets. So people are very sad, hence depression. It's an economic depression, but people are also depressed. And this poor family ends up giving birth to the first surviving quintuplets. These 5 little girls, they're very cute, but it's really strange what happens to them. The Canadian government actually takes them from the family and they become an attraction. You can go and see the Dion quintuplets like you would in a zoo or something. It's to give people hope. They're considered a miracle during the Great Depression when people are sad, but it does a lot of things to these girls. Like, they're taken away from their family and they're basically like circus displays. So on your own afterwards, go back and watch this video. All right, so the day of the stock market crash, which is the direct cause, but not the only cause of the Great Depression, right? It's the direct cause, is the stock market crash of 1929. So this is known as Black Tuesday over here. And you can see in this picture here, people rioting outside. It was a really crazy day, which we'll talk about more. It doesn't actually end, this Great Depression, until 1939, so into the start of World War II, and it's a worldwide depression, right? So it's not just limited to Canada. It's the New York Stock Exchange that crashes, and basically it affects most of the world. All right, so at this time, you have an election taking place in 1930, 1 year afterwards, between this new guy here, R.B. Bennett, and William Lyon Mackenzie King. William Lyon Mackenzie King at this point isn't really recognizing how bad the government has gotten for Canadians. And he makes this speech that many say kind of sank his ship in the election. So he makes a speech called the 5-cent speech, where he says that he won't even give people 5 cents to help them get out of the depression. Basically, You made your bed, you have to lie in it. It's up to you to fix it. R.B. Bennett, on the other hand, is very appealing. He's a conservative, he's a self-made man, he's a millionaire, and people in 1930 think that he may be the answer to the Great Depression. So he ends up winning the election in 1930. William Lyon Mackenzie King is out, and in comes Bennett. All right. So things continue to worsen. By 1933, 30% of the labor force was unemployed, and 1 in 5 Canadians became dependent upon government relief. Government relief basically means money or food stamps. It's important to remember that Canada in the 1930s did not have the social welfare state that we have today, right? Welfare didn't exist. Unemployment insurance didn't exist. You paid for healthcare. There was no free Medicare. And there was conditions on your relief. So first, you had to be married to receive relief. Second, you only got relief if both parents were unemployed. So if one parent was unemployed and the other one was not, you didn't get relief. The other issue was relief was $10 a month for the entire family. So your entire family has to live on $10. If your children were grown, you received less money. If you were a single man or a single woman, you received no money. You also had to publicly line up for relief. So you have to think about how that would feel, right? Every day you'd have to wake up early, try and get your spot in the line where people watch you line up there, asking for money for your family. So it's an emotional toll, right? As well as like just an economic toll. You also have the emergence you see here in these pictures of shanty towns, right? People couldn't pay their bills. $10 a month is not a lot of money, and a lot of people were not even getting those $10. So people lost their homes, and they built up shanty towns. This is where families are living. A lot of families are living in the 1930s. And here's a picture over here of a family, right? And they're just trying to get by. They're just trying to survive this difficult time. So young women, as we know, up before 1929, women in Canada were considered to be property. By 1929, because of these ladies here, the famous 5, women are officially recognized as persons. However, just because they are persons does not mean that they are being treated equally in society. Particularly in the Depression, there was no hope of a woman getting a job, right? If you had a man who could do the job versus a woman, the man was going to get the job first. Young women were expected to stay at home. So we can think about that. And they wanted to work, though, because they didn't want to be a burden on their parents. So a lot of women wanted to work, but they're not able to. No one will hire them. Young men also faced a lot of difficulties. A lot of the men left home between the ages of 16 to 18 looking for work, and they actually rode the rails. So what riding the rails means is they would sneak on to railroad carts and travel from city to city to city looking for jobs, begging for jobs, basically. And the government got nervous about this, right? The government got nervous about all of these young men who are traveling around, who aren't happy with the government, who aren't happy with the current system, and they're nervous, right? Just like we saw their nervousness in the Winnipeg General Strike, they're nervous of a revolution, right? They've seen the Russian Revolution, they've seen what it did to Russia, so they're nervous about that taking place in Canada. So R.B. Bennett sets up something called relief camps, and relief camps are for unemployed young single men. They're very strict, though. They're run by the military. You do not get paid a lot of money, about 5 cents a day for extremely hard labor. You're not allowed to drink. You're not allowed to socialize much. So some people refer to them as slave labor camps, where other people argued, well, at least you have a job now. So there's pros and cons depending on how you take this position. But for the men themselves, they were not very popular. So it's about 44 hours a week, sometimes 20 cents a day, sometimes 10 cents a day. They were given 3 meals a day, though. They were given a place to sleep, and they did get an allowance for tobacco. So just to give you an example, so food prices in 1932. So it'd be 4 cents for a loaf of bread, about butter, 15 cents you can see over here, right? So this is just your food, and obviously these are the basics, right? So teachers before the Great Depression made about $1,050 a year. During the Depression, they made $400, right? So your salary has been slashed by more than half, and prices have actually gone up. And this is just food, right? You also have to think about, like, if you're paying for home, if you're paying for clothing, if you're paying for transportation, supplies, etc., right? Just the things that you need on a day-to-day basis. So that equals that they were making $7.69 per week. All right, on top of the economic crash in 1929, you also have a number of other events that take place, and it's often referred to as dust, drought, and grasshoppers. So there's a huge disturbance in the prairies. Basically, the land had been overworked. I don't know how much you know about the prairies, but the prairies are extremely flat, largely farming areas, and there was a drought. And what happens to dirt when it's dry, right? It turns to sand. So there was a huge drought. It barely rained for about 10 years. And it coincided with the Great Depression, just to make things even better for people during this time. So it coincided with the Great Depression. And you also have a plague of grasshoppers. You're going to be looking at the scrapbooks in a minute, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But literally, like, plague of grasshoppers. Everything is covered by grasshoppers. Your houses are covered by grasshoppers. Your floors are covered by grasshoppers. Yeah, your kitchen, it's really disgusting, right? Kind of think about the rats in the trenches, right? But this is in the prairies. And it creates something called the Dust Bowl. So the prairies are very flat. There's not a lot of rain, right? What happens to dirt turns into sand, strong winds, and you would get these giant tornadoes of dust. There's pictures of people wearing gas masks, right? Similar to what we saw in World War I, but they're actually wearing the gas masks just to breathe during the dust storms. I'm going to show you a picture in a second. So wind blew everywhere. So farmers get completely destroyed, right? They have crop failures, drops in income. So yeah, not so good. This is one picture here. So like it's, as you can see, right, the homes, some homes were literally crushed by these storms. Interestingly, in the Great Depression, there were no really depressing movies, and you have the emergence of Disney, right? We're going to be looking at Disney in World War II because Disney did a lot of World War II propaganda. Snow White was a common one, and Whistle While You Work became kind of like a propaganda song for the Great Depression. So I encourage you on your own afterwards to go back and watch Whistle While You Work and the Dion quintuplets. Just before we go, I want to go back to the causes of the Great Depression. So, too far. All right, so just a quick reminder. So the stock market crashes in 1929. That is the direct cause. That's what starts it, but it is not the only cause, right? You have rising unemployment because all of those new technologies that people wanted, they already have. So there's less demand, less jobs, less money. Banks close. Why do banks close? People were putting their money into the banks. Banks only keep 10% of your money. So they were investing the other 90% largely in the stock market. When the stock market crashes, the banks have lost your money. So even if you've saved your money, it's gone. People stop purchasing these products, so things continue to go down. Higher taxes on imports and the drought, which creates things like the Dust Bowl and basically destroys the farmers. So this is what Canada is facing as of October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday. Thanks very much. So what you're going to be doing now is looking at the scrapbooks to get some information about what life was like during the Great Depression. And I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks. It didn't work.